and which is the most important factor that should be used. Now this definitely depends upon the variables under play. Number one, what kind of independent variable manipulations we do, whatever factors कहाँ से उभर के आ रहे हैं, हमारी मैनिपुलेशन से उभर के आ रहे हैं, और जिस ग्रुप में कोई मैनिपुलेशन नहीं हो रही है तो वहां पर उनका इनहेरेंट एग्रेशन है या इनहेरेंट गुडनेस है, वो उभर के सर्फेस पे आएगी. Is that all right?
Yes, ma'am.
अपने दिमाग में वो प्रैक्टिकल्स रखा करिए जो आप क्लास में करते हैं कि हमारा जो बेसिक हाइपोथेसिस है वो प्रूव होना चाहिए. जो अलाइड हाइपोथेसिस हम बनाते हैं उनका रेलेवेंस रिसर्च में तो है, बट बेसिक रिसर्च स्टडी में उतना शायद इम्पोर्टेंस नहीं है. What problems might exist in using research participants who are not attending college? Now, when you have a problem in which you are dealing with children who have never attended college or they are school dropouts, so there are certain dimensions, certain variables which will not play a role in people who are not in higher education. Their understanding is limited. The kind of questions, for example, if you see the scale of PANAS, PANAS, which is a positive and negative affectivity scale, the child may not be able to comprehend certain adjectives because of the lack of understanding. So the kind of participants, the usage of scales, अब illiterate population को अगर आप GMAT दे देंगे तो वो नहीं कर पाएगा ना वो.
Yes,
उसके लिए आपको ravens ही देना पड़ता है. So that's how experimentation distinguishes between the kind of participants, the kind of apparatus, the kind of scales that can be administered, and on whom it can be administered. Is that clear? Can we move on? Experimental method कुछ समझ आ रहा है?
Yes.
डिफिकल्टीज हैं जो हमें आती हैं जब हम एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड करते हैं. सबसे पहली है डेफिनेशन. आपने कौन सा वेरिएबल उठाया, उसको आप एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड में कैसे कन्वर्ट करेंगे, ये एक बहुत अहम सवाल है. Which means how are you going to define it? How will you formulate the problem so that it effectively becomes an experimental method problem? The second are the demand characteristics. कल भी हमने बहुत टाइम लगाया था demand characteristics के ऊपर. The role of the participant in trying to understand the objective of the study, right? So that's where the demand characteristics become an important dimension. The control of conditions. शोर वाले माहौल में आप बच्चे को बोल रहे हो कि मेमोरी ड्रम के वर्ड्स रिकॉल करो, बहुत मुश्किल है. वो चाहकर भी 20 में से 4 या 5 होगा, अकेले आप और आपका सब्जेक्ट बैठेगा उस रूम में, then maybe he'll be able to focus better. So control of conditions is a very important dimension for us to understand where the independent variable is going to impact on the dependent variable. किस किस्म के environment आप देते हैं. Yesterday we also took the example of the brightness discrimination apparatus. It is a dark room in which you can just see a speck of light. Now what is going to happen? If the entire room is well lit, वो बेचारा brightness discrimination का छोटी सी विंडो में से कुछ नजर ही नहीं आएगा. आपका सब्जेक्ट कैसे करेगा काम? So constancy of conditions नामक वस्तु जो है वो फेल हो गई. आपका apparatus का रोल 0 हो गया है इसी जगह. So that's where the control of conditions is a very important dimension where the manipulation of the dependent variable will have its effect on the dependent variable. Similarly, the ecological invalidity, the environment is not right. How do you expect the dependent variable to be in the desired direction? Problems of ethics. Now, very many times when you get your subject into the lab, we don't take his permission. आजा बैठ जा, बस ये आज करना है. तो हम कहीं ना कहीं उन एथिक्स को रीच कर रहे हैं. हम कहीं ना कहीं उनसे ऐसे सवाल पूछ जाते हैं अपने एक्सपेरिमेंट के दौरान, शायद वो नहीं आपसे डिस्कस करना चाहते. So we are impinging on his privacy. Now what are we doing? And confidentiality is an important dimension. Very many times during the course of our studies, we try to ask certain things which are probably very, very close to to his heart or her heart. I'm not able to see the words clearly. How will I spell them out? Why do I have to put myself into that, that frame of mind which says that I have a limitation? I don't want to tell the world. I look completely fine. It comes when you are doing the experimentations. Are the limitations clear? Experiment करने की बड़े सारे ढेर ऑब्जेक्टिविटी है, रेप्लिकेशन है, स्टैंडर्डाइजेशन है, ये सब तो हमारे we have these on the tips of our hands as students of psychology because we've been reading about it all our lives. Systematic method, conditions can be controlled, data collected can be analyzed in an objective manner so that it is reliable. Cause-effect relationship can be established. Findings are open to critical examination and verification. It discards subjective experiments. याद आ रही है बात? Subjective belief and objective reality. बहुत appropriately placed है in the experiment method. Now there is a precise control of variables. Experiments can be replicated. It is also worth noting that an experiment yields quantitative data. Now quantitative data is a very important dimension for us in research. One of the basic reasons why experimental method came into being. When you trace the history of experimental method, one of the pioneering jobs done is that quantification of data started. Otherwise we were talking in terms of philosophical beliefs and philosophical point of views. Till such time that standardized scales, useful apparatuses were developed and data could be quantified. So these are important things to be kept in mind. उसी का विपरीत जो है वो सब उसके disadvantages. Human behavior is changeable. Identical behavior of the same individual will not occur even under identical conditions at different times. Now experiment करना जो है is not possible anywhere and everywhere. You need to have a lab for it. You need to have proper apparatuses for it. Now all that requires lots of money, lots of time. You need to seek consent of the person. You cannot reach out to people. The person has to be taken to the lab to be able to conduct the experiment. So that can be a slightly difficult task. You need specialized skills to conduct an experiment. कोई भी apparatus use करना है पहले सीखना पड़ेगा. ऐसे तो नहीं है कि आप बस कर लेंगे. The obtained data may not be reliable. Artificiality, obviously जब आप लैब में बैठ के काम करते हैं तो एक artificial environment create कर रहे हैं. Behavior in the laboratory is very narrow in its range and demand characteristics. One of the major negatives is when people ask you so many questions, sometimes they are not able to fulfill all the requests that the participant puts forth. Psychology has a history of using biased or unrepresentative sample. वो हमारी एक convenient sampling नामक वस्तु है. जो मिला उसी को पकड़ के ले आए. Not realizing that probably the individual doesn't fit into the age bracket, the individual doesn't fit into the bracket where you are looking for that individual. So that's when it is called a biased sample. And so obviously the outcome of the research will not be in the desired direction. The strength of the experimental method is the amount of control which experimenters have over variables. However, it must also be noted, it is not possible to completely control all the dimensions. So there are always some things which are left out, and those are the dimensions which become the extraneous variables which start to affect, and there can be errors in your results. With this we come to an end. We have discussed normative data, we have already discussed. Normative data is an important advantage which experiments have over observational techniques. Normative is the normality of data that we get, the kind of data that we get. So there can be a problem in that because आपके participants गलत थे या apparatus गलत था, किसी भी वजह से जो आपका डेटा गलत आ रहा है उसका आउटकम या इंटरप्रिटेशन भी सही डायरेक्शन में नहीं चलता. So with this we'll end the experimental method. Did with RMS 3 days back. The scales. In the scales, the postulates are a very important dimension. Those of you who were not in class must discuss with your fellow classmates